What's happening, Packer fans? Welcome into the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. Once again, we have plenty to discuss. We've got the Packers figuring out where they're going to play week one during the season with not being able to play in New Orleans. We've got a practice squad completely set. There were waiver claims, none that really affected the Packers, but there was a lot going on once again on Wednesday. So let's break it all down here today on the Pack a Day podcast. If you're not subscribed already, please make sure to do so. If you're not following on Twitter, you can follow on Twitter at Pack a Day Podcast. You can follow me at Andy Herman NFL. But let's start off right away with where Green Bay is going to be playing in week one. Of course, not able to play in New Orleans. There were the rumors that maybe it was going to be in Dallas, but it sounds like that wasn't going to work because of a concert. There were rulings, but I guess the rule by the NFL is that they had to play in an NFL stadium. So kudos to the New Orleans Saints. They tried to do their homework a little bit and figure out where it would be hardest for Packer fans to get to. It sounds like they had a few different options and they did their research to try to figure out, where Green Bay couldn't get to or where it was going to be most expensive or hardest to get to. And they came up with Jacksonville, Florida. Well, kudos for trying, Saints, but unfortunately, the Green Bay Packers and their fans travel literally everywhere, and they will find a way to be at that game. I guarantee you, especially with it being basically a neutral site game, I guarantee you there are going to be tickets for sale, and Packer fans will find them and eat them up. So Packer fans, you know what to do. Find those tickets, fill up that stadium. I believe our very own Sarah Kelleher is going to be there, so that's at least one down, but we've got a full stadium to fill. So make sure if you know somebody to tell them to get to Jacksonville to fill up that stadium with Packer fans. I know that's going to be the case one way or the other, but I think that's a solid result for Green Bay. I know some people were a little bit concerned about the heat and humidity. Playing a 3:30 p.m. game, 3:30 Central, be 4:30 Eastern game in the heat of Jacksonville. Sounds like it could be around 90 degrees. I get that, and certainly the Saints players living in New Orleans have a little bit of an advantage there, but for those of you who have been in Green Bay, I'm not saying that this is Southern heat, right? But there's been a lot of humidity in Green Bay, as there always is during the summer. The heat at 90 degrees, it certainly is going to be a factor, but I think it's going to affect both teams, and I certainly think Green Bay will be used to the humidity just coming from the summer in Green Bay. So I think you'd rather have that early in the season than, be used to 40-degree weather, 30-degree, 20-degree weather in Green Bay, then have to go play in 85-degree humid weather. So I think it's going to be okay, and I think that's a solid result. And no matter what, you can't complain about it, right? This is still way better than having to play in New Orleans with their crowd. That would obviously be worse. So this is a win for Green Bay, and wherever they wanted to play it, not in New Orleans was going to be a bonus. And I think playing in Jacksonville will certainly be a bonus for Green Bay. As kind of the day went on, that was kind of the thing that we found out first. Then everyone was kind of keeping an eye on waiver claims. No Green Bay Packers that were released in the recent days were claimed by other teams. And the Packers may have put in claims on players, but because they're so far down in the pecking order, either they didn't put in claims or they were not awarded any players. So they weren't awarded any players off of waivers, which meant their same 53 that they put together on Tuesday is still the 53 as I'm recording this at, I guess, very early on Thursday morning. So no real news there. I think this is always a good case study in don't overvalue the guys that are at the bottom of your roster, right? Again, and as I've stated over the course of the last few days, there's what, 30, not even, probably 20-ish players that were claimed total. So of all those guys that are released from 80 to 53, so what, 27 per team times 32 teams over the last day, basically, there's 20 of those guys that were claimed. They're just not a ton, and Brian Gutekunst went over that in pretty good detail, just saying, it's not always easy, to claim player. Or maybe it was LaFleur. I forget which one it was. It might have been LaFleur, but it's not quite as easy to claim guys as you may think. And of course, you don't know, the culture that they're coming from, what type of, person that they are, how they're going to affect the locker room. So, you know much more about the guys that are in your locker room, and they've been practicing with you, most of them since OTAs, mini camps, etc., and many of them for the last few years. So, or at least a couple of years. So, there's a lot that goes into that. And again, it's just a good reminder that, yeah, you might be afraid of losing a guy or two, but for the most part, your guys probably aren't getting claimed, and you're probably going to be able to get most of them back in the practice squad, which is exactly what happened in Green Bay. Then we had kind of the press conferences, Brian Gutekunst, and then eventually Matt LaFleur. I think the only major noteworthy thing there, one, Brian said that they've had good conversations with Aaron Rodgers as of late, which is, of course, is always a positive sign. But talked about Hunter Bradley. Bill Huber asked the question about Hunter and some of the missed snaps in practice and things like that, and he didn't have a great practice. But Brian, gave Hunter Bradley a vote of confidence. Said in games he's been good, only maybe had a handful of snaps that were errant in his career in Green Bay so far. So it very much seems like they are going to be sticking with Hunter Bradley. Zach Cruz of Packers Wire put together a list of long snappers that were released from other teams at final cutdowns that maybe Green Bay could take a look at. But from all intentions so far, it seems like Hunter Bradley will be the long snapper going into camp. So 2/3 of that, kicking unit from snapper to holder to kicker will be intact. Hunter Bradley, the snapper, Mason Crosby, the kicker, of course, J.K. Scott gone at punter. So there will be the change there. But overall, again, a vote of confidence for Hunter Bradley from Brian Gutekunst. Let's get to the main topic though. And that, of course, was the practice squad. They added 16 players to the practice squad. 15 of them were players that were just recently released off the practice squad or off the 80-man roster. One of them, Chris Blair, I believe was released a little bit prior to that, if memory serves correct. I don't think he was on the 80-man roster. But in total, they get 16 of their guys back, including Abdullah Anderson, Kirk Benkert, Chris Blair, Ben Braden, Jacob Capra, K. Bianento, Innis Gaines, Tipa Naliai, Bronson Kafusi, J.J. Molson, Wellington Prevalon, EQ, Patrick Taylor, Cole Van Lanen, Ray Wilborn, and Juan Winfrey. So a really good group of players. I'm not going to touch on all 16. I don't think that's going to do anyone any favors, but I do want to go over a couple. I think the first noteworthy omission from that group was Christian Uphoff. And listen, it's been clear from day one of minicamps, OTAs, etc., that Christian Uphoff on the safety depth chart was behind basically everyone else. He was behind Will Redmond, who went on IR. He was behind Henry Black. He was behind Vernon Scott. He was behind Innis Gaines. He was last on that safety depth chart. Now, that being said, he also made some really big plays on special teams. And as you're looking at that very last roster spot, I thought based on how he played on special teams that he was going to get that roster spot over Innis Gaines. It turns out they don't go with either Gaines or Christian Uphoff, and they stick with just Henry Black, Vernon Scott, and of course the two starters. But I thought for sure he would be back on the practice squad. Now, it is worth noting here that this is a two-way street, right? Just because he was released and not claimed does not mean that Green Bay just gets free reign to put anyone they want back on the practice squad. The player has to be a willing participant too. And I don't have inside information. I don't know anything. I don't know if Christian Uphoff wanted to explore the market and see if he could find another team, or if Green Bay just said, hey, we're going in a different direction and we're not interested. He is not, as of end of day Wednesday, on any other team's practice squad. So it's not like he had something else just immediately lined up, which leads me to believe that this was a Green Bay decision, but we don't totally know that for sure. And again, maybe he had, maybe he had offers elsewhere that he's weighing. Maybe he had an injury that he wanted to kind of, work out. Who knows, right? There's a variety of different things here, but either way, semi-surprising that Christian Uphoff is not back on the roster. I think some good news here, Ben Braden does get back on the roster. And again, he gets released. I still think the most shocking thing of the cutdowns for Green Bay was Jake Hansen over Ben Braden, especially after Braden was competing for that starting spot. But what a great result for the Packers to be able to get Braden back on the practice squad. Ben Fennell tweeted out he was surprised that Braden didn't get claimed somewhere. And he made a great point, right? Offensive line play throughout the league is struggling, and the depth of offensive line is usually really, really bad once you get down to that 8th, 9th guy. The fact that Ben Braden isn't the 8th or 9th best lineman on most teams is surprising, or at least 9th or 10th, right? So definitely surprising, but great news for Green Bay that they get him back to be able to, add more depth to that offensive line. They got Cole Van Lanen back as well. So they really were able to basically bring back the entirety of their offensive line, which was great news. And again, I thought there was, a real chance that he was going to get claimed. Instead, he doesn't. He sticks on the roster. Equinemius St. Brown, another one, right? This is a player that knows Matt LaFleur's system, that is familiar with Aaron Rodgers, that has played snaps within this offense. And a lot of his not making the team was just health this offseason and maybe not really taking that next step forward, right? He's had a few seasons, both under Mike McCarthy and 2 under Matt LaFleur, to show what he's capable of. I think at this point we know what EQ is, but that's not a bad player, right? And it's somebody, again, that knows the system, is familiar with Aaron, that knows Aaron's checks. Having that guy as your 7th receiver on your practice squad has a lot of value. Again, we know that there's going to be injuries, offensive line, receiver, whatever. Having guys like EQ, Ben Braden on that roster, on that practice squad roster for now, could definitely pay dividends down the line. And then I think another one, Juan Winfrey, right? This is another player who was really of OTAs and mini camps in the first few days of training camp, maybe even first week of training camp, was arguably the talk of training camp. The buzz of training camp was Juwan Winfrey. I think very telling that he was not released with an injury designation, which meant he had to have been very close to returning. He signs back on the practice squad. Hopefully he can pick up where he left off and go throughout this season, maybe provide some depth at wide receiver. Now, granted, if you're getting to Juwan Winfrey after the 6 guys currently on your roster and EQ on the practice squad, you don't want to be getting down that deep. But having a guy like Juwan Winfrey and just having somebody that has that potential and was really starting to show what he was capable of, what you're looking for is next season. As all these wide receivers are free agents next year, you're probably going to have to make a tough decision on Randall Cobb, which probably ends up not being that tough if we're being honest. Devontae Adams is going to be there's a lot of questions at wide receiver on this team. Juwan Winfrey being back and being under team control next year could be a guy that's definitely competing for one of those back-end roster spots a season from now. And then lastly, Kirk Benkert, right? This is just, again, a tremendous story throughout camp. He showed, again, I said he has a little bit of Jeff Garcia to him, right? Just that gamer mentality, figures out ways to maybe move the chains and make some throws where you wouldn't exactly expect it out of him. Not a high-end prospect, which is why he doesn't stick on the 53 or get claimed anywhere else. His age starting to play against him. This is his 4th year in the league, not a laser rocket arm, not insanely mobile, or at least like a 4.4 40 guy. So there's limited upside here, but certainly a really great guy to have in your quarterback room and a really great number 3 quarterback where, again, he's just going to go out there and compete. I don't think totally different than, what a Matt Flynn would bring to the table, right? From a handful of seasons back, probably way more than that now. Time is flying, I guess, but I think he can have a similar type of career arc to a Matt Flynn if he gets the opportunity. Maybe not throwing 6 touchdowns in a game and getting a huge contract from Seattle out of it, but I think he can be that type of quarterback, and I think that's a great number 3 quarterback to have. So great on Green Bay for getting him back as well. The only other noteworthy one, I think, is J.J. Molson, and I think it's noteworthy because not certainly standard practice to keep a second kicker on your practice squad. Now, when you have 16 guys, you have a little bit more flexibility. There could be games where they activate him from the practice squad to be the kickoff guy if it's going to be maybe a cold weather game, or if they think special teams is going to be an issue, if the team's got a great kick returner or something like that. But more importantly, I think this just goes to show you that they feel really strongly about Molson, who had a really nice camp. And I tweeted this out and nobody likes it. I don't like talking about it either. But for all the players that are on a last dance, this could very well be Mason Crosby's last dance as well. And again, I hope Mason Crosby can play into his 60s, right? But eventually Father Time catches up to everyone, apparently except Tom Brady. But he's getting up there in age. There's money to be saved next year on his contract where Green Bay's going to have to pinch every penny that they can. And if they feel strongly about a younger kicker, next year when they kind of have probably a bit of a rebuild, that could be the year where you make that change. If he goes all season on the practice squad and makes it into camp next year, you have to think that there's a strong possibility that Molson makes it out of camp next year as the kicker. And again, not only is this a last dance for maybe Green Bay side of things, Mason Crosby could retire too. So Green Bay hedging their kicker position a little bit by having Molson in camp or on the practice squad throughout the season. I think that was a smart move, especially based on how he kicked. I honestly was a little bit surprised with the Lions, cutting both of their kickers. I thought the Lions were going to claim him. They went with a different kicker, but great news for Green Bay that he's back, and we'll see how things kind of work from there. as far as the roster goes, and I kind of made mention of this, the other day, when you've got a 53-man roster and a 16-man practice squad, you're getting 69 of your 80 guys back. And for the most part, that's what happened, unless I'm miscounting somewhere. It's not simple math, right? Because you had guys go on PUP, and you had, a punter traded in. You had a practice squad guy that came in. But I believe there's a total of 11 players that did not come back to the roster in some capacity. So these 11, Christian Uphoff, as we talked about, J.K. Scott, Reggie Begelton, Coy Cronk, Steven Denmark, Dejon Harris, Damon Hazelton, Carlo Kemp, Dexter Williams, Rogesterman Ferris, and Delonte Scott. Those are the players who were on the 80-man roster who are not now on the Packers roster in any capacity. So only 11 guys. And I don't think there's anyone that you're like, wow, that's like J.K. Scott. The hope is that they upgraded there, right? Reggie Begelton, again, when you've got 6 guys on the active roster and then EQ and Winfrey as your 7th and 8th on the practice squad, like you don't need 9 receivers, right? And Begelton was clearly a step behind those other 2 guys that went to the practice squad. And then Christian Uphoff, I think, was the only real surprise there. And again, who knows what happened there, but they still have 4 guys on the active roster, and then they got Ennis Gaines on the practice squad. So it's not like they're, completely, lost at that position either. So as we kind of look at this moving forward, those first couple of cutdowns from 90 to 85 and 85 to 80 are almost more consequential than this, right? 10 guys cut in those 2 cutdowns. And again, one of those guys actually back in Chris Blair, 11 guys cut in this cutdown that are not back with the team in some capacity. Overall, I think Green Bay deserves kudos, and Brian Gutekunst deserves kudos for how he put this team together. I think he did a really great job. I mean, the Isaac Yiadom, Josh Jackson trade worked out for both teams. They both ended up changing scenery and both ended up making the 53-man roster. So that's a plus trade. That's ideally what you want. And then, Kadar Hallman, right? Brian Gutekunst trades Kadar Hallman for a guaranteed 7th-round pick, not a contingent 7th-round pick, but a guaranteed 7th. The Texans cut him. The Texans don't even get him back on the practice squad. He goes to the Saints practice squad. So just awful management by the Texans, but great on Brian Gutekunst for being able to pull a 7th-round pick out of nowhere, which, by the way, his 7th-round picks have done pretty darn well. 7th-round picks have done really well, including Kylan Hill this year. So that's not for nothing. And I think he kind of got all the guys back that he wanted. You look at a Ben Braden, Kirk Benkert, some of these guys you thought would be claimed. They were able to release him, get him back on the practice squad. Maybe they made some interesting decisions with a Jake Hansen, but they got all their guys back. So I thought it was a really masterful job by Brian Gutekunst, and I think this is a very talented 53-man roster that is having a last dance and trying to win it all with Aaron Rodgers this upcoming season. 2 other really quick news and notes. Dennis Kelly returned to practice, so that's great news for the depth along the offensive line. And then Zadarius Smith, his status for week 1 still in the air per Matt LaFleur. That's going to do it for me. Thank you so much for joining me. We'll be right back here tomorrow with an all-new episode, but until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.